Good evening, everyone. Thankful for you tuning in tonight as we continue our study together in our time of isolation, our time of quarantine. Hopefully, this has been of benefit to you, and it's been an opportunity for you to share the message of the gospel with someone that you know, even in the digital domain. Thankful for so many of you that continue to share these things and host watch parties on Facebook and share the videos via YouTube and Twitter and other ways. Certainly that is a great opportunity that we have, and I hope that that's not something that you take lightly or that you take for granted. Again, we've said this the last few nights. I just want to make mention of it before we begin our study tonight. If you're watching this, or if you've seen our videos in the past concerning the book of Daniel, or you've watched our worship services the last couple of Sundays and then Bible class on Wednesday nights, if you would like to speak with someone, if you have questions, please reach out. Please feel free to make contact with us. We'd love to spend time studying God's Word with you. Please feel free to reach out any way that you can. You'll see in just a second, you'll see an email address and a phone number. Please do not hesitate. If you want to send a text message, feel free to do so. If you want to send an email, feel free to do that, and those things will be acknowledged and replied to as quickly as possible. Before we launch into our study tonight, I do want to make you aware of something that we're trying to do as a church family. You've seen it probably on social media, the idea of the hashtag #WeShallAssemble. It's just a way of encouraging fellow Christians out in the world that no matter what situation comes about, and in this case it's something far beyond our control, but the virus itself that has attacked so many and caused such a panic worldwide, even when things like that come about, the church still is in existence, and the church is still moving forward, and the church is still doing their absolute best to assemble even in these difficult times. And so we want to encourage each other, and we want to encourage other Christians as well. So as you see there on the screen, if you've taken pictures of your family worshiping during our time apart, please send that to us either by email at srcbtright@gmail.com or via text at 256-280-8355. I do ask that you'll include the names of those in your family, as we want to make sure we give everybody, get everybody's name right and get everybody's acknowledged in these photos. And we're going to be putting that together in sort of a special presentation again to encourage not only those in the Rogersville community, but also the church worldwide who may be able to see this. So please, if you will, take those pictures and share those with us so that we can encourage and uplift one another. Very quickly, before we begin our study again, also as we did last night, for our 3rd through 6th graders, real quick, let's give you a few questions that have been answered in our previous studies. Hopefully, Mom and Dad, you guys will sit down with your 3rd through 6th graders and ask them these questions, and maybe perhaps hopefully they've been tuning in, or you've been discussing maybe Daniel's first 3 chapters of Daniel with them. These questions come from Daniel chapter 3, which we covered last night in an extended time of study that we took last night. Number 1 for tonight: why did Nebuchadnezzar summon the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, and the other rulers? Again, this is from Daniel chapter 3. Why did Nebuchadnezzar summon all of those people, all those rulers? Why did he call them up and want to have a conversation with them? You find that in the very first few verses of chapter 3. The next question is, what were the people supposed to do when they heard the music? Again, that's covered in the beginning of chapter 3. What were the people supposed to do when they heard the music? We're going to go ahead and move on. If you need to, feel free to pause the video to get the answers from your 3rd through 6th graders. Also, who were the 3 men who refused to bow down? And I encourage you to encourage your 3rd through 6th grader to use their real names. I guess obviously the answer is fairly simple. It's an answer that we know, but truthfully, I would encourage you to ask your children to use the real names of those 3 men who refused to bow down. How many men were thrown into the furnace? And how many men did Nebuchadnezzar see? We talked about that, his astonishment based on what he saw. So discuss that with your kids tonight. Have them tell you why he was so astonished. And then the last question, when Nebuchadnezzar began to discuss the idea of those that were saved out of the furnace that night, who did Nebuchadnezzar say was sent by God to save the three? So those questions, pretty easy questions, pretty straightforward questions, but we just want to encourage those 3rd through 6th graders to participate with us in our Bible study. So ask them those questions tonight, discuss that with them, have them sort of retell you the things that we discussed last night out of Daniel chapter 3, a story that they're familiar with, but a story that makes a huge, major impact even in our world today. All right, tonight we are looking at Daniel chapter 4. We're going to take Daniel chapter 4 actually in 2 parts. It's a very lengthy chapter, and we're going to discuss tonight the dream, and we're going to discuss its interpretation, and then tomorrow night, Lord willing, we'll sit down and we'll look at the actual events that took place following this dream and this interpretation. Daniel chapter 4 is a really powerful chapter, but let's begin with this idea that we discussed last night and even back on Friday night concerning Nebuchadnezzar, and that is his sort of roller coaster relationship with the one true and living God. You see, he goes back and forth from acknowledging and respecting Yahweh, the one true living God. He goes back and forth from that attitude to an attitude of pride, an attitude of I am equal to, if not better, than God. And so we've seen that back and forth multiple times already in Daniel chapter 2 and in Daniel chapter 3. Tonight we're going to see it again. Daniel chapter 3, if you remember, ended with Nebuchadnezzar making an edict, making a statement that if anyone spoke ill of the one true living God, the God of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, if they spoke evil of that God, they would be torn limb from limb. That's how he ended it. Blessed be the God of those men. And so now, let's see what happens as we begin chapter 4. King Nebuchadnezzar, to all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. It has seemed good to me to show the signs and wonders that the Most High God has done for me. How great are his signs, how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. His dominion endures from generation to generation. Wow. When you read that, you think, okay, so the light bulb has gone off for Nebuchadnezzar. He is now beginning to truly grasp and understand that God is ultimately in control of everything. Well, that does seem to, that appears to be what's going on here. That is the perception. But ultimately, there's something else going on that God knows about the heart of Nebuchadnezzar, that Nebuchadnezzar has not been willing to confront just yet. And so chapter 4 is really a lot about God forcing Nebuchadnezzar out of his comfort zone, out of his attitude of superiority, and into a real focus on how far off he was from truly worshiping God. Now, these words are wonderful words. Nebuchadnezzar's praising God for the amazing things that have been done, but ultimately God knows his heart. And so as we begin here in verse 4 with the actual dream that he's going to discuss, Nebuchadnezzar realizes there's something else happening that is not setting well. As you see here, he was at ease in his house. He's prospering in his palace. But in the midst of that, he sees something in a dream that makes him very, very afraid. So he asks for all the men. And look, if you see there, verse 7, we're going to try our best to move quicker tonight, to move along in our study tonight. But if you look down there at verse 7, he calls the usual suspects, the magicians, the enchanters, the Chaldeans, and the astrologers. And I've always found this interesting. When you read that, why didn't he just start with Daniel? That's always been my question. Why, if you know that those men, these 4 groups of men, could not answer you in times past, why would you ever go back to them? Why not just go to Daniel right out of the gate and get the interpretation of the dream? And the truth is, because ultimately I believe, wholeheartedly I believe, that Nebuchadnezzar down in his heart struggled with turning everything over to God. So here's what he did. He finally did go to Daniel. And he did finally ask. He finally did go to who he should have gone to in the first place. Now, if you notice verse 8, this is just a sort of a simple phraseology, a simple phrase, but it's very important if we're going to discuss the idea of the heart of Nebuchadnezzar not fully accepting who God is. This is the point where you're going to see that revealed, and that is because he says, "He who was named Belteshazzar after the name of my God, in whom is the spirit of the holy gods." You see, Nebuchadnezzar is still struggling with the idea of there being one God and one God only. So he brings Daniel before him, and he says to Daniel, "Look, this is difficult. This is hard. I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in you." Verse 9 again, revelation there about who the way that Nebuchadnezzar viewed God. He says, "I know no mystery is too difficult for you. Tell me the visions of my dream that I saw in their interpretation." It's again a challenge, just like in chapter 2. He tells him about a tree. Verse 11, "Tree grew and became strong. Its top reached to heaven, and it was visible to the end of the whole earth. Its leaves were beautiful, and its fruit abundant, and in it was food for all. The beasts of the field found shade under it," verse 12, "and the birds of the heavens lived in its branches, and all flesh was fed from it." Now, I saw in the visions of my head as I lay in bed, and behold, a watcher, a holy one, came down from heaven. He proclaimed aloud and said, "Chop down this tree, lop off its branches, strip off its leaves, and scatter its fruit. Let the beasts flee from under it, and the birds from its branches, but leave the stump of its roots in the earth. Bound with a band of iron and bronze, amid the tender grass of the field. Let him be wet with the dew of heaven. Let his portion be with the beasts and the grass of the earth. Let his mind be changed from a man's." Now, if you notice, watch the change in tone. Nebuchadnezzar's been telling about a tree, and now when the watcher comes in his vision, it changes, and it begins to use this male pronoun. Let his mind be changed. Him, those types of things are beginning to be said. And let a beast's mind be given to him, verse 16. Let 7 periods of time pass over him. The sentence is by the decree of the watchers, the decision by the word of the holy ones, to the end that the living may know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men. See, that's the problem. That's the problem. You see, the light bulb never truly went off in his heart to realize who he was dealing with. Now, the watcher in this vision says, this tree is going to have to know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will. And he sets over it the lowliest of men. You see, there's a lot of teaching going on in these words. Now, Nebuchadnezzar closes his discussion, at least his part of it, with Daniel and says, this dream I, King Nebuchadnezzar, saw, and you, O Belteshazzar, tell me the interpretation, because all the wise men in my kingdom are not able to make known to me the interpretation, but you are able. For the spirit of the holy gods, again, notice there, little g and the plural, just a struggle there, is in you. Now, Daniel is going to give him the breakdown. I want you to pay attention here. Daniel is alarmed, verse 19. And the reason why he's alarmed is because he knows immediately what the dream is and what the interpretation is. And he says, look, ultimately, verse 19, the end of verse 19, may the dream be for those who hate you, and its interpretation be for your enemies. But Daniel knows it's not. He knows who this dream is really about. You see, the tree that he's going to say, let's skip ahead here. Let's go on to verse 22. He knows, as he tells Nebuchadnezzar, the tree is you. You've grown and you've become strong. Your greatness has grown and reaches to the heavens, your dominion to the ends of the earth. But I know that you saw this watcher. Well, the truth is, this is the interpretation. It's a decree of God. It's a decree of the Most High. It's the decree of the one and only God. Verse 25, you will be driven from among men. Your dwelling will be with the beasts of the field. You shall be made to eat grass like an ox. You shall be wet with the dew of heaven. And 7 periods of time will pass over you till you know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will. You see, it's ultimately been this entire time that God is striving through Daniel and through Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and through others to get to the heart of Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar has consistently allowed his pride to get in the way. And the light bulb, if you will, just to use that example, it's an easy visual aid. The light bulb never truly comes to light because he doesn't really get it in his heart. He says the right things, and occasionally he acts the correct way. But ultimately, deep within his heart, he just doesn't accept that God is in full control. He thinks that he still has control. And so here's what the dream ultimately, kind of the culmination of that is this. As it was commanded to leave the stump of the roots of the tree, your kingdom will be confirmed for you from the time that you know that heaven rules. Therefore, O king, let my counsel be acceptable to you. Break off your sins by practicing righteousness, and your iniquities by showing mercy to the oppressed, that perhaps there may be lengthening of your prosperity. Daniel is begging Nebuchadnezzar, please break off the things that you're doing. Stop challenging God. Stop antagonizing God. Stop trying to put yourself on the level of God. Back down, Nebuchadnezzar. Back down. Learn and know who God is before it's too late. Now, tomorrow night, what we'll do is we'll pick up with the realization of the reality of what's going to happen and what does happen to Nebuchadnezzar. But here's the thought I want to leave you with tonight. Nebuchadnezzar was wondering and wandering. Those words sound alike, but they mean kind of two different things here. But Nebuchadnezzar is guilty of both of these things. He's wondering aloud, as it were, that he should be thought of like a god. He's wandering from things that are true that he's seen. He's actually visually seen the actions of God. He acknowledges that at the beginning of chapter 4, but he wanders in the sense that he moves away from, sort of aimlessly, sort of without direction. That's the idea of wandering. It's sort of moving about without any real direction. And I know the old phrase, the old cliche is that not all that wander are lost. I get that, but in this case, Nebuchadnezzar is absolutely 100% lost. He's wandered away from what he has seen and heard and what he really truthfully ought to have known by now. And he's wondering, he's considering, he's pondering why everyone doesn't think like he does. You remember him building the statue in chapter 3. You remember him looking at his kingdom the way he did in chapter 2. And truthfully, he's just not getting it. And there's the verse there that you see, Proverbs chapter 16, verse 18. Pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. You see, that's ultimately why Daniel is so blunt in this last verse here that we're going to look at tonight, verse 27, which is, please stop doing what you're doing and change. Because truthfully, the only way this is going to end up for you is a fall and destruction. It's a cautionary tale for all of us that we may sometimes say the right things. We may speak the right words. We may even act the right way occasionally. But if it's not within our heart to truly allow God to control everything about us, then we are in danger. We are in danger. And certainly when we believe ourselves to be running the show and God, you're just a secondary figure in our story, we are in much, much danger. You are fearfully and wonderfully made by a God who wants you to choose to let him have control, but he's not going to play tug of war with you. If you want to snatch that away and try to run things on your own, be prepared. Destruction and a fall, they're coming. They're coming. Why not turn things over to God? Where, like he says in Colossians chapter 3, you can be protected. Because those that are in Christ, that are with God, your life, your existence, Colossians says, Paul says there, your existence is hidden with Christ in God. What a beautiful picture of protection that is. Why not give that over to God, and especially in times like that we're in right now? Man, what a beautiful picture it would be for you to give your life over to God. We've had that happen in our community here in the last few days, and it gives me goosebumps to think about the idea of those who recognize in this time of uncertainty that there is a certain God. The old cliche, the old saying goes that we may not know about tomorrow, but we know who holds tomorrow. And in Nebuchadnezzar's case here, he believed himself to be the one holding tomorrow. And as we ought to know, as followers of God, you're not promised anything more than what you've got right now. So put that in the hands of God and watch him protect it and watch him grow it. Watch him take care of it. Watch him love it. And watch him love you and put things and opportunities in your pathway to make you grow. And that's a beautiful picture. Hope that you'll join us tomorrow night as we continue our study in Daniel chapter 4. And for those of you that would like to participate in what we're trying to do, as we showed earlier, send those pictures in via email or text. Hope you all have a wonderful evening.